Hello and good evening. Welcome to the Citizens Party's 2022 federal election campaign launch. I'm Glenn Isherwood and tonight I'll be the moderator of these proceedings. Before we get started, I'd like to explain the format for tonight's event and share some important details with you, the audience, the viewers, so you can participate in the evening's discussion as well. So firstly, we're broadcasting this event tonight live across YouTube, but we are also hosting all of our candidates using Zoom. This event will be posted on YouTube later for all those who cannot make it tonight to see it live. So this interface is quite new for us at the Citizens Party, the first time we've ever tried putting this type of an event together. So our technical team behind the camera here have got about 5 monitors operating at once. They're beavering away. So if there are any technical issues tonight, I encourage everyone to remain patient, sit back and enjoy the ride. So the first thing I want to mention tonight, this event is for you, the audience, to find out more, meet our people, meet our candidates, find out what drives us. Listen to what our candidates have to say about our policies and principles. We want you to ask questions. Half of tonight's event is all about the question and answer period. And on your screen, our techies will put it up there for you to see, is an email. And that email address is ask@citizensparty.org.au. That email is being monitored throughout tonight's live event and beyond. So all questions there will come to me and I will read some of them out tonight. I invite everyone also who's joining us here tonight for this event to find out more, to visit our website where just today we have launched our 2022 election campaign website pages. Our candidate profiles are there, candidate videos are there. That page is citizensparty.org.au/election 2022. So tonight's proceedings are as follows. In a moment, I'm going to introduce the candidates on this call right around Australia, state by state. I'm then going to invite Craig Isherwood, our Senate candidate for Victoria, but also the Citizens Party's co-founder and national leader, to present a few words on covering 3 points: who we are, where we come from, and what we've done. A little tempted to break out in a song there. So after Craig, I will return to read out the 15-point policy program platform for this election campaign of the Citizens Party. I'll do this in brief form, bullet point form, not the time to elaborate and expand on each point, but that is on our website. On our website, you'll see policy videos, dedicated policy videos. More are being uploaded and worked on as we speak. So check out our more detailed 15-point program there. Once I've covered that, we'll hear from the candidates. We'll go and we're going to have some brief statements from each of our candidates tonight, where they're going to share what drives them, what parts of our platform and what parts of the Citizens Party policy they're passionate about. Why are they running? So we'll cover that, and then we're throwing it open to a 1 hour or thereabouts Q&A session where you get to ask those questions. So again, tonight I encourage everyone who's joining us live across Australia, ask your questions. That's ask@citizensparty.org.au. Again, ask@citizensparty.org.au. Introducing our candidates this evening, and I'm going to start in New South Wales. Our Senate team for New South Wales is Anne Lawler in Maitland, Bob Butler in Chatswood. We have Alexis Garneau-Miller standing in the seat, the lower house seat of Cunningham in Wollongong. Paul Borthwick, candidate for Robertson. Moving to Queensland, our Senate team there. Jan Picallis from Beenleigh. Rod Dole from, where's Rod from? We'll find out in a minute. Trudy Campbell in Northern Territory. We have Peter Flynn joining us as well from Humpty Doo, except there looks to be some internet. Oh, there we go. Bit slow on the internet from Peter. Moving to WA, we have Jean Robinson and Denise Brayley. South Australia Senate, Russell Francis, and unable to join us today, but with us in spirit is our second Senate candidate for South Australia, Rodney Curry. Moving to Victoria, our Senate team, Robert Barwick and Craig Isherwood. And for the lower house candidates, electorates, we have Jeff Davey in the seat of Nichols and Chris Lay in the seat of Mallee. So now we're going to move across to hearing from National Leader, co-founder and Senate candidate for Victoria, Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Welcome everyone to this new format. It's the first time we've ever done it, as Glenn said, so we have to have some fun tonight. My job is who we are, where we've come from, and what we've done. To give you a brief introduction, for a lot of people maybe listening tonight don't know too much about us. Now, I am the co-founder of this organisation, and therefore I've got some insights and the ability to fill you in on a lot of things like that. But really the key, ladies and gentlemen, is that the drumbeats of war are almost becoming deafening against the backdrop of the potential for a rapidly accelerating economic collapse. So today's launch is one, it could be at a more opportune time, the launch of the Australian Citizens Party for the first time. We have been running elections for the last 34 years, at least 8 of them, but this is the first time in our new name. So quite a number of you in this format would be watching this unique event from the comfort of your own lounge rooms. So I would like you to come back with me 34 years in time to Queensland, to Kingaroy to be precise, to February 1988, 34 years ago, and join me in my lounge room. Because at that time, in this similar sort of date, we had 10 people, 10 farmers and small business people. I was 27 years of age, and my wife Nolan and I had 3 small children under the age of 5. Glenn, our MC tonight, wasn't even 1 year old. So that's what we're looking at. We had our meeting because our nation at the time was being destroyed, and we had to act. From my lounge room, the Citizens Electoral Council was born, and 31 years later, in, of course, 2019, we changed our name to the Australian Citizens Party. In 1988, we found ourselves in rural Queensland and in Australia in dire economic circumstances. And in many ways, reflecting on it, 1988 was a paradise compared to today. In the 1980s, you had the global policy of controlled disintegration promoted by the then US Federal Chairman, Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker. This policy was totally destructive for our country's economy and for our national sovereignty. The entire global financial system was accelerating its disintegration into a global speculative casino. That all started in August of 1971 with the end of the very stable post-World War II New Bretton Woods era fixed exchange rate system. In 1983, the newly elected Labor government, with Bob Hawke and Prime Minister Paul Keating as Treasurer, floated the Australian dollar, subjecting it to the supply and demand of money within the world currency market. So our currency, instead of being a tool to facilitate the functions of economy and trade, became a tradable commodity. So the political turbulence in 1988 in Australia and Kingaroy was immense. On the 20th of October 1987, for the first time in a long, long time, the Australian share market fell 25% in that day following the Dow Jones. The share market lost 41.8% of its value by the end of October. So ordinary people that invested in the share market were desperate. Interest rates were not 1 to 5% as they are today, but they were 18 to 22%. This was the controlled disintegration. I know I had a business loan with the Commonwealth Bank, and I had a mortgage with the ANZ Bank for 15%. Inflation was running at 8%, right? And anyone running a business knows what happens to prices and costs and so forth when you're trying to run a business in that environment. And today, inflation is rising rapidly around the world. In Queensland, the Queensland Premier, Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen, was forced out as Premier after 19 years, and people sensed a great change afoot. We were witnessing the end of the developmentalist era, to borrow a term from Bob Katter's book. Leaders back then took pride in building infrastructure. This era was being progressively replaced by radical green, anti-development policies, which have stifled the building of necessary physical economic infrastructure in power, water, transportation and many other areas. In agriculture, we were plagued by the get big or get out policy promoted by the big banks. Previously viable family farmers were driven off the land because of the very difficult low commodity prices, high interest rates, and no recognition of the difficult climate-related circumstances rural producers face in their industry. Many farmers during the 1980s who tried to escape the high interest rates were sucked into the banks, into taking foreign currency loans, especially they were sucked in to take these loans, and they were especially denominated in Swiss francs. In many cases, these bank-sanctioned loans came back to bite them when the currency fluctuations occurred and values shifted. Manufacturing was decimated beginning in the early 80s, and it was decimated from the Hawke-Keating reduction of tariff barriers. We had 4 car manufacturers back then. Today, we have none. So for my land room in 1988, we decided that we needed the citizens living within Queensland, Cedar Barambah, to take responsibility for the nation, which of course is one of our themes in the Australian Citizens Party, citizens taking responsibility. We succeeded in the Cedar Barambah state election to create a mass strike. And I think I'm pretty confident to say if we hadn't won the seat, I'm not sure that we would be here today. But we are here today because we proved a principle that when citizens act, they can change history. But we also discovered that it takes much more to exist in politics than just tapping into public rage and public discontent, which many political parties are doing during this election campaign today. Over the course of the next 3 years, from 1988 to 1990, the Citizens Electoral Council split into 2 factions. One faction wanted to focus on, cultivating the popular rage and disconnect within the population, and the other to focus on solutions to tackle the profound and much harder issues of fighting for national sovereignty, national banking, dumping free trade, dumping globalisation and so forth. The latter, of course, was a much harder, less travelled road, but it brought us to where we are here today. In the late 1989, our CEC became associated with the late US statesman and physical economist Lyndon LaRouche. Mr. LaRouche had been campaigning for nearly 2 decades against the same policies of free trade and globalisation and for the principles of universal economic justice that we campaign for and support today. LaRouche contested the US presidency a number of times, and consequently his battle won him a lot of enemies but also a lot of friends. In 1990, our former national chairman, Maurice Hetherington, with another founding member of the CEC at the time, travelled to the US, and with the help of Mr. LaRouche's organisation and with his knowledge, his unique knowledge of physical economy, we published our first economic development program, development program for the nation called Sovereign Australia 1. This was a breakthrough physical economic plan for our nation, and many of our policies today can be seen through this document written more than 30 years ago, because good ideas and policies never age. In 1991, after I spent several months in the US with the LaRouche organisation, I made a crucial discovery and refounded the ACP, or the CEC back then, into what I call a philosophical political party. We ceased to function based on populism or ignorance and began to develop policy in a thoroughly principled way. My discovery, and hence our philosophy, is that at its core, all human beings, all people everywhere, are created with creative reason. You may have heard the idea of a creative spark. Well, the idea is similar. If this unique quality of creativity is developed and nurtured within everyone, then it enables us to make discoveries of the unseen physical principles that govern and determine the way the universe works. These unseen principles, for example, like gravity, had to be mastered and overcome for man to step onto the moon, to fly and step onto the moon, for example. We can't see gravity with our senses. We can't touch it, we can't smell it, you can't see it. All that we can see is the paradoxes that arrive from these physical principles. So through the process of creativity, of mastering the use of looking for and solving these paradoxes, we can make great breakthroughs. This divine nature of creativity sets us apart from all other animals and gives us the responsibility to master those unseen physical principles, which can actually improve the human condition and the condition of the planet as a whole for generations to come. These principles, when applied through technology into the physical economy, can transform what we call the productive powers of human labour for the betterment of all human beings. This is not some arbitrary good idea, but it is the essential nature of what it means to be human, and is embraced by all the main monotheistic religions of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, and as well as the very long tradition of Confucianism within China in an equivalent way. Our human creativity, which is the true nature of mankind, is the idea celebrated in the world's greatest poets and musicians and artists, so Shakespeare, Schiller, Keats, Shelley, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart and many others. And this philosophy gives the Australian Citizens Party the place to stand to develop just and progressive policies, which you'll hear tonight. Our policies are always focused on the general welfare of our population and the world. We always test our policies by asking the question, does this policy serve the common good of our people? This is a natural extension of our philosophy into the role of a truly responsible system of governance for our population, and by extension into the world as well. This ACP, as we've demonstrated time and time again, opposes the tyranny of those who wish misery on the world by reducing human beings to being less than beasts, and inducing them to accept less than their true human potential, and denying them justice in all its forms to those who need it. This does not make us popular. We are constantly shining lights on those cockroaches in our society who want to hide under the fridges of bureaucracy or hide in the drawers of the financial establishment after imposing tyrannical actions and injustices on our people. Yeah, there you have a paradox. We're not in politics to be popular. We reject this oligarchical principle where we see it. In practice, a self-appointed, in practice a self-appointed and often unelected elite dictating the terms of and the quality of life over the masses or the vulnerable. But we don't simply object and protest against them. We provide the solutions for citizens to act and fight against them. So that's where we've come. Now I just want to turn to give you a sense of what we have done in the last 4 years, because it's been amazing when people take responsibility and act. Over just the last 4 years, we've had 3 bills introduced into the federal parliament and achieved 6 Senate inquiries. Remember that metaphor about shining the light on cockroaches? Well, that's what Senate inquiries do. Not necessarily that the parliamentarians involved in the committees are all cockroaches, but it does produce some very interesting results. Right, so, and we've done that without having anyone else in the parliament. We haven't got elected members in the parliament right now, but we're hoping to change that. The first issue I want to come up with quickly is bail-in. Since 2013, our organisation has been fighting against bail-in in this country. That's coming up to 9 years. The bail-in, of course, is an attempt by the international financial oligarchy centred in the City of London and Wall Street to steal people's deposits, like they did in March of 2013 in Cyprus. In 2013, we uncovered, however, that the International Financial Stability Board, based in Basel, Switzerland, which is charged to bring about bail-in legislation globally, announced that legislation was in train for Australia. So that set off the alarm bells. Where is this legislation? What do we have to do? And we raised merry hell on this issue from 2013 onwards, looking for, quoting international sources like the Financial Stability Board. We published 450 prominent Australians that said no to bail-in, let's go with Glass-Steagall. We published this in The Australian on the 3rd of December 2013, and we published magazines like, for example, Glass-Steagall Now, which was mass distributed right throughout the country, giving the chapter and verse what was being done, what was being proposed. Now, that legislation didn't appear until 2017, and it was completely by accident that it happened that we found it, because Doug Mitchell in our office, right, was looking through his internet, and he discovered that there was a bill put up right at the end of Friday in August of 2017 called the Financial Sector Legislation Amendment, Crisis Resolution Powers and Other Measures Bill 2017. And that was being introduced into the Parliament. Well, we swung into action. And through a flood of calls to politicians, we achieved our first Senate inquiry. This was led by the Centre for Bankers, Senator Jane Hume. But this inquiry was forced to address the issue of bail-in. And then when the bill came into the Senate on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2018, where we already had an amendment ready to move in order to protect us from that bail-in bill in the Senate, it was effectively going to remove any loopholes in the bill that made bail-in legal. The Senate under Jane Hume rammed it through on the voices of just 7 other senators. That's out of 76 senators. There was only 8 senators present in the chamber, and that created an absolute uproar. We still have bail-in today, and we've still got work to do on that, but that's in progress. Then you can look at what we did following that. We continued to champion for Glass-Steagall as a remedy for Glass-Steagall. In 2018 through Bob Katter, and in 2019 through Pauline Hanson, we introduced our Glass-Steagall Banking System Reform Separation of Banks Bill in order to be able to bring Glass-Steagall, the protection mechanisms for a population against bail-in, into place. Now, we forced another committee into having to look at that, and again, chaired by Senator Jane Hume, the Senator for Bankers. They denied that Australia's bank needed Glass-Steagall separation, but we forced them to have to look at the issue. Jump forward to 2019, and remember the cash ban? Right, when the government was trying to ram through its currency restrictions and use of cash ban bill 2019, in cooperation with a number of other activists and organisations, including John Adams, a former Liberal Party advisor, and Digital Finance Analytics Martin North, we organised a huge revolt against the government's bill to ban cash transactions over $10,000. Now, this campaign forced a Senate inquiry, and eventually an amazing victory happened when the government dropped the bill in late 2020. Then you have another bill, the Audit Bill, Australian Banks Government Audit Bill 2019. This was introduced in 2019 again by Bob Katter, and it was designed to shift the responsibility of allowing the auditing of banks and so forth to the government's Auditor General, right? In other words, you had a club, you've got a private club there, and we say no more private clubs with KPMG, Ernst Young, PwC and Deloitte. We want the government's Auditor General to look at that. So that legislation was introduced. Then we have had another amendment introduced, and that was the Banking Amendment Deposits Bill 2020 bail-in. In February 2020, One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts introduced a bill to close the loophole, which I talked about in the Valentine's Day bail-in law. This led to another Senate inquiry, which said a high-ranking former Liberal Party leader said that it was a no-brainer and the bill should pass. The bill was voted down, but because the government was afraid of senators crossing floor, the government agreed to negotiate behind the scenes to close the loophole. Jump forward into 2020. Look at the inquiry we started with Christine Holgate. We smelled a rat when Scott Morrison unlawfully removed Christine Holgate in October 2020. And we then listened to the Licensed Post Officers Group, who said that Christine Holgate was the best CEO that Australia Post had ever had. We then went about our business and exposed the role the banks played in forcing her out because she wanted to start a postal bank and would break their monopoly. It exposed the Morrison's government privatisation agenda, to which Ms Holgate was an obstacle. So our campaign, our relentless campaign on that, exposed the defeated privatisation agenda. They were backing down everywhere, and of course allowed Christine Holgate to clear her name. And the last inquiry that we had forced was the Senate inquiry into Sterling Income Trust and ASIC. Right, this was the sixth inquiry by our work on the AECP, the sixth inquiry we've achieved in 4 years. And it's important that because we want to use the Sterling First disaster as a catalyst to completely overhaul the financial regulation in Australia. And the evidence is in. The report's been handed back, and the fact is that ASIC and the West Australian state government betrayed vulnerable elderly customers. And now it's time to put it right. Senator Malcolm Roberts has called for full compensation for these victims, and that's what we will support going forward. And Denise Brayley has to be, our Senate candidate for Western Australia, has to be congratulated for her tireless championing of those Sterling First victims. And you no doubt hear more from Denise on this over the course of tonight. So the Australian Citizens Party was only able to achieve these remarkable breakthroughs because ordinary citizens took responsibility for their nation and government and acted. We will continue to fight for economic and wider justice to rebuild our country's economy and to prevent war. This 2022 election will be, as I said, the first contested under our new name, the Australian Citizens Party, and I would very much like to invite you to come and join us and have some fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And I think it's well worth underscoring a few points you made there. First of all, just how many thousands upon thousands of everyday Australians made those achievements happen. As a party, we don't tell people, vote for us and we'll fix your problem. We say, take responsibility and join this fight to hold these people accountable to solve the problem. So the imperative is always on we, the citizenry, to act. And those 6 hearings, those bills in Parliament have been brought about by pressure. And it's incredible to hear it in that. That's 4 years. Now, that's not couched within an election cycle. The Citizens Party doesn't operate on election cycles. So here we are. This is ironic because we are here with our candidates for this election, but the work will continue no matter what for this justice to deal with this economic crisis that's facing the world. So what I'm going to do now is read through very briefly the 15 key pillar policies of the Citizens Party. Now what we've done is we've ordered these in such a way that at the top is what we would say is our flagship, our most critical, urgent priorities in terms of addressing the economic crisis and the needs for the Australian people. So first of all, number 1, the Australian Citizens Party proposes the creation of a public post office people's bank. Break the oligopoly of the big 4 banks, which are arrogantly closing branches, debanking lawful businesses and reducing access and availability to cash. we have written legislation in draft form called the Commonwealth Postal Savings Bank Bill. Number 2, a national development bank to expand manufacturing and agricultural industries. Establish a national development bank to provide long-term, low-interest credit on flexible terms for Australian manufacturing and agricultural industries. Number 3, a national infrastructure bank to finance visionary nation-building infrastructure. We can establish a national infrastructure bank from which local, state and federal governments can borrow for infrastructure projects to build Australia and create jobs, ending Australia's reliance on foreign borrowing, asset recycling, privatisation and expensive public-private partnerships. 4, massively expand resources for healthcare services. Mobilise federally a dramatic increase in clinical staff, paramedics, nurses and doctors, equipment and technology, beds and hospitals to address the crisis besetting every aspect of the public healthcare system: ambulance services, public hospitals, regional healthcare, mental health, disability services, aged care, elective surgery wait times, etc. 5, no bail-in of bank deposits. Immediately amend the Banking Act 1959 to remove the 2018 conversion and write-off provision applying to any other instruments that could be used to seize the savings deposits of Australians to prop up failing banks. What Craig covered in our long battle in these last several years to amend and get rid of that threat. Number 6, Glass-Steagall banking separation. Enact the Citizens Party's Banking System Reform Separation of Banks Bill to mandate a full separation of banks with deposits from speculative investment banks and all other financial services. 7, overhaul corporate regulator ASIC into a feared law enforcement agency. End Australia's shameful reputation as a paradise for white-collar criminals by overhauling ASIC into an aggressive law enforcement agency feared by the banks. 8, full compensation for financial victims. Compel the banks and other financial institutions to fully compensate all of their financial victims, including the tens of thousands of cases from the decades before the 2018 Banking Royal Commission. Number 9, no war with China. We must end the dangerous drums of war rhetoric pushing Australia to join the USA and UK in confronting China and prioritise diplomacy to resolve tensions respectfully, starting with reiterating the One China policy that Australia has held since 1972. And I want to emphasise on this point with regards the deterioration in our relationship with China. We are already seeing at this point a rise in racism and xenophobia to the Chinese community in Australia. This has been highlighted in a recent report by the Chinese Community Council of Australia, who have highlighted our efforts as a party and those of others in moving us away from this McCarthyite attitude where we have been conditioned and the population has been put in a position where any measured diplomatic or contrary view on the subject of China-Australia relations is being shot down, and intimidation is affecting the Chinese community in a very big way. Number 10, independent foreign policy. End Australia's foreign policy subservience to the USA and UK by asserting an independent foreign policy in Australia's national interest. That's a long point. Check out the website for the full breakdown of extra details of what that entails. 11, justice for refugees. The Citizens Party will end Australia's institutional mistreatment of asylum seekers and refugees by immediately releasing those in long-term indefinite detention. We will ensure Australia should accept New Zealand's offer to assist in settling refugees, release the 33 young men who have languished in Melbourne's Park Hotel for the last 4 out of 9 years of indefinite detention, simply arriving by boat, and will allow the Marugapan family to return to their home in Billwheeler, Queensland. Point number 12, a moratorium on home and farm foreclosures. Protect homeowners and farmers from mass evictions in a housing market crash with a foreclosure moratorium that keeps families in their homes while the government directs a reorganisation of failing banks and write-downs of mortgage debt. 13. Invest in national food security. Prioritise policies that support Australia's family farmers who, unlike corporate agribusinesses, guarantee the nation's food security. 14. Repeal the prohibition on nuclear power. Amend the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999 to repeal its prohibition on nuclear power generation, by which Australia is the only country in the world that denies itself the use of not only one of the major energy technologies, but one which the EU has classified as green energy because it is emissions free. And finally, 15, a 0.1% tax on financial speculation. Tax $1 in every $1,000 of turnover in stocks, bonds, currency exchange transactions, and both exchange-traded and over-the-counter derivatives. So, there you go, have it, guys. That's the 15-point program in brief of the Citizens Party. Again, go to the website, which is on your screen, to see where you can get more detailed policy videos will be uploaded to flesh that out for you. Now, let's get into introducing our candidates. What I would like to do in this section is invite all of our candidates to say a few words about the parts of our 15-point policy platform that really speak to them, which they are passionate to support, why they're running, and what makes them tick, why are they running as a candidate. So I want to open with Senate candidate for New South Wales and the Citizens Party's National Chairwoman, Anne Lawler. Go ahead, Anne.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I think the thing that I would like to give a sense of is the overall importance of the policy platform and why we've shaped it in the way that we have. You know, we're facing a strategic situation where not only are we in an economic breakdown crisis, we are on the brink of World War III. The policies that our leaders, Labor, Liberal, have followed over time that have got us into a position where we're economically, morally and financially bankrupt, are policies that have come from the same people that are actually instigating and pushing for war against other countries. Our involvement, as Craig went through with Lyndon LaRouche, one of the things that got me back in the 90s when I got involved with the party was that the only way that you can secure peace in the world is through economic development and through collaboration with other countries. And if you look at the main points of what our platform is, it all deals with the financial bankruptcy, how to break the back of those global banking interests that have got us on our knees and most of the world as well. So they're key things. That's what I'm passionate about. We need to implement those as quickly as possible. We need to build the infrastructure that's going to be able to fund the, our health services and our education and all of the things that we need to be able to develop as human beings and participate within the country. So I think that just gives it in a nutshell, and I'll let someone else have their say.
Thank you, Anne. So I want to now, working through our 15-point policy program, as I mentioned, the first priority is to sort out our banking system and get a bank that serves the people. So now I want to throw to Alexis Garneau-Miller in the seat of Cunningham to say a few words about why she is running as a candidate.
Thank you. The most important thing at the moment for people to understand is that if we don't take action around the Australia Post Office Bank urgently, that there are a domino of implications for every community in Australia. I see that people are becoming aware of it now, increasingly, probably from a negative view on the back end of the Christine Holgate inquiry, the Senate inquiry. However, having worked with many bankers in the City of London myself, I can see that progressively with the Citizens Party, we've been able to reach it so far along where it needs to go that we're now at that teetering at that tipping point with the bill being presented to Parliament shortly. So the most important time is right now to get behind the Citizens Party, their entire platform. What I like about it is that it's very specific, it's very research-led, and when the population begins to understand just how much work over these years has gone into getting the policies to where they are now, that once you vote with your click with your mouse now or vote with your feet and then put your heart and mind behind what's going on, then Australians will understand that it is a hopeful situation. It is. I know because I speak to lots of people in Australia and around the world about the sense of helplessness and powerlessness that they've been feeling. And yet the Citizens Party can really offer that hope of being in a position to implement very specific policies to solve some of these problems very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis.
Well, I thought I'd keep it short and sweet. There's so much great information on the Citizens Party website, but for any viewers that have not explored that before, it's well worth going and have a look at the very comprehensive videos that they've got on there to educate yourself about some of these policies.
Hopefully I'm coming through okay. So continuing that train of thought on...
Oh, look, I'll have a chat because my main reason was about manufacturing in Australia. Like, I mean, everyone knows it's disappeared because like we used to have an aircraft industry in the 50s. We used to make 5 or 6 different types of aircraft. Steel production's reduced. We've only got still 2 steel plants in Australia. Sydney, we don't make trains here. We import them from Southeast Asia. And that's my main issue because I've had arguments with people over the years where they go, we can't make any constraints, it's too expensive, the labour's too dear. And my argument to that is like, Japan has no natural resources. It's one of the biggest manufacturers in the world, and it only has people and imports everything. And the cost of living in Japan is not cheap. Why we can't do it is beyond belief. And if we bring back manufacture, it's the other point I've got is training of people. I was an apprentice draftsman. I'm in the HVAC commercial industry, commercial air conditioning. I'm probably the last person who did an apprenticeship in New South Wales in drafting. And most of the drafting now in my industry, it's shopped offshore to India, China, and Philippines. The problem is, all the guys I grew up in, we're probably 10 years away from retiring, so I don't know what happens then. So they're my points. The Citizens Party's policy are basically, in my view, are for the long-term good of Australia. I mean, we have all the natural resources and we don't make anything, and I think that's a shame because we're a well-educated country and we need to improve. I've lived overseas, I've worked in Thailand, I've worked in India and Singapore. And yeah, it's staggering. I mean, even our steel production, BHP built a plant in Thailand and closed one down in probably Newcastle, where I was born. So anyway, that's my point. I'm quite passionate about making stuff in Australia, and I'll leave it at that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul. On this issue of the National Bank solution, I'd like to hear from Jan Picallis, Senate candidate for Queensland.
Thanks, Glenn. I got involved in the Citizens Party about 23 years ago, married with a young family, and I was not political before then, but somebody from the Citizens Party said, well, it's not good enough when the leaders of the country are not doing the right thing, not leading us in the right direction. And because politics is not kind of in our Australian culture, I found it really very difficult. So, but with the reading of first LaRouche and the Australian Alert Service, I began to understand the science of physical economy, which is beautiful because human beings are the center of it. Human beings are the economy. And it made sense to me that if you eliminated all the people from Australia, you don't have an economy. They are central to it. And it's our creativity that makes us human, that we have to nurture and develop so that our future generations have a better standard of living than what we had to put up with. Although I've had a good life, but what's the next generation going to, their standard of living? And we can see that it's been going downhill. So I've stood up. I don't pretend to know everything, but I think as long as you're on the journey of learning and applying what you know when you know it, and help others to get there as well, then you're imparting you're imparting the role as a responsible citizen. And so the national banking, we've taken that idea on the road, the Citizens Party all over Australia, but I lead activists in Queensland, and we've done a lot of footwork, and we've been promoting it for decades. And I've got tens of thousands, I don't know how many thousands of maybe hundreds of thousands to people that we've spoken to over the years, but very tiny few, really, a minority actually become intrinsically involved. But as things get worse, our ideas resonate with them more, and we've not changed our policies, but reality has forced people to come back to us. So that's why I'm running.
Thank you, Jan. Now I want to move to discussing this question of justice for the victims of this criminal predatory banking system. So I'm moving across to Western Australia to hear from Denise Brayley. Take it away, Denise. Why are you running as a candidate? All right. Well, while we're having a connection issue there with Denise, someone who's working very closely with Denise extensively over these many years and has been on the forefront of the fight against this predatory banking system is Robert Barwick. So, Robbie, if you want to say a few things, and we can come back to Denise in a moment when we get some audio feed. So, Robbie, over to you.
Yeah, Denise, chime in as soon as you can unmute yourself. But it's been great working with Denise, because there's a lot of injustice out there, and you can't turn a blind eye to it. We're actually witnessing.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead.
The main word that has been reiterated throughout these conversations, and particularly starting with Craig, and I would suggest that it's policies. The policy, we can have all the laws you want in Australia, but you cannot have it functioning properly if you don't have decent policies to use those laws to their full effect. And that's what we've had in Australia at the moment. It's a situation where it's led to a lot of people being ripped off by the banks. We've seen that over and over again. We've seen disgraceful things happen with the post office businesses and the farming community. And they have been ripped off by mortgages and the banks again. So the big factor in all of this is the big banks. And no one is guiding the big banks on what they can do and can't do. They've just got free rein as though they know what's best for the average citizen, and they actually don't. At the top level, they don't meet the average citizens. Everything is about business. Yes, I understand that. But in Sterling First, they allowed this thing to come into being, and the regulators were then being managed by the banks to toe the line with the policy. And the policy was that this product for Sterling First was for tenants to sign a lease, in which case they would be tenants for life, providing they sold their own properties and put those properties into a trust account by selling their houses and putting the money into a trust account. Of course, the trust account was not a proper trust account. It was stolen. Within 3 years, 18 million had disappeared. These people that were then as tenants for the rest of their lives, aged about 75, 80 in that sort of average bracket, and some of them older up to 93, they were all told, right, the Ponzi has collapsed. You have to move out within 3 weeks, and they've only been there 3 years or less. Some of them signed up only 4 months before. The $380,000 that they put in there as the proceeds from the sale of their home had gone. That is why Craig is saying that this particular one represents one of the most malicious situations that we've ever seen in Australian banking to date. And it has to be fixed. But the other thing about banking is that it controls everything about our lives. So this is why the aged care is in disarray. It's all about money. This is why the actual healthcare system is in disarray, is it not? Is there anyone in Australia that disagrees with what I'm saying in terms of the chaos that we see? And we've been, how many decades have we been saying this has got to be fixed? And it doesn't matter who has been in power, it hasn't been fixed. Other priorities came up. We were told in 2000, was it 2008, that globalization was good for us. I don't see the benefit. The farmers don't see the benefit. Some might, but it's not sustainable. So I think there are things that Citizens Party have been talking about for many, many years, back 40 years. And I started listening to some of their arguments from very learned people, I might add, both here and overseas, that were joining in these types of conversations. So if the conversations are a little bit hard to keep up with, it doesn't matter. What matters is what your thoughts are to be part of a citizen of this country by being a member of the Citizens Party and put your thoughts in as to how you'd like change, because something we know has to happen in this country, and it's change, and a change in policies. It's the policies that are killing us all. And I feel very passionately, obviously, about this type of subject. But I have spent 30 years as a criminologist providing the regulators, which have been utterly useless, like ASIC and APRA, to be able to manage complaints from customers, consumers. What people didn't know is that only 10% of customers, if you're lucky, would have their complaints even looked at by the Financial Ombudsman. The financial products are all tainted, and so therefore, particularly the ones marked sophisticated investors, you don't even want to get involved in those. It's a dedicated excuse for developers to push these dollars, yes, into the community to build more high-rise, build shonky high-rise. We've seen that with elevators falling apart. Build other types of things in a rush, thinking this is good for our nation. But there's no policing. The corporate cop is the policeman, the corporate policeman, not doing its job. It actually was putting all the consumer complaints into a bin where they don't go higher up. They've said that in the actual myriad of inquiries we've had ASIC and others, all already causing cries for a royal commission into ASIC, which should have happened years ago. So those that really understand the grassroots level of what is happening, and those that understand the top level of the conversation as to why it impacts the Australia as a nation, I can tell you how it impacts every single person. So everyone in Australia right now that's got a mortgage, you better start sweating, because the mortgage is probably not as safe as you think it is. A switch can be pulled at any minute, and if you can't keep that mortgage payment up, you're gone. You know that. But what you don't know is the mortgage isn't safe. It's been on-sold through packages. I won't go into that one. Robbie will be really happy if I don't go into that one right now.
Well,
but this is something I brought up in Parliament, waving documents around, 400 documents over my head. In the inquiry I called into ASIC, it was called the Performance of ASIC Inquiry in 2014. And what are we now in 2022? Talking about the same thing, same danger in mortgages. That was the gift to the bank. They could do what they like with the mortgages. There is no control and no one to complain to if that falters on our nation. And it will impact everyone, not just your own mortgage. And I feel, and I guess that's why Craig and Robbie and other people like that have been talking to me on and off for the last 7 years. Thank you.
And to those authorities in ASIC, WA government, who are still to this point holding out on compensating the Sterling victims, they have a lot to answer for, and they have a lot to face with Denise in the campaign to come. So across to you, Robbie. Comments on that and your role?
Yeah, and thanks for that, Denise. You've just heard an insight into the depth of the problem, and it is a huge problem. The Citizens Party has a lot of very, very positive ideas about building a future for Australia, but we've had to face the fact that there's a lot of cleanup to be done if we're going to be able to implement those ideas, because and it's not just about exposing the corruption that's the systemic corruption that's in the financial system. Once you do expose it, like the Royal Commission did in 2018, you can't sweep the tens of thousands of victims under the carpet and just pretend they don't exist. There has to be justice, right? Everyone, it's easy for us to not connect to the need for justice until we're a victim ourselves. And what we've identified, if you're paying attention to the Citizens Party, is if you're not a victim yet, you should be alert, because you easily could be. That is how systemically rigged the system is in favour of the predators over the prey. And we've documented in detail how this came about through neoliberalism, the caveat emptor, let the buyer beware philosophy, etc. So we have to clean that up so that we can actually have confidence in a financial system that can serve the real economy. And that's where the passion comes from. And if you're not passionate, if you're not connected, wait until you meet a few victims who lay out to you their circumstances, and you realise just how unjust this is. And of course, we've been talking about the Sterling victims, and it's such a heartbreaking case. All these elderly people, they cannot start again. And as things currently stand, they're about to be thrown on the scrap heap for $18.5 million. Less money than Josh Frydenberg forgave from Harvey Norman's overpayments on JobKeeper. Right? This is not a money question for the government. So we will push these things very hard, but we push them from a standpoint of principle so that we can use it to fix the problems in the financial system that make it dysfunctional, so it can serve everybody, so we can have the investments we need through the institutions that we've put forward, like a postal bank, like the development bank, like for manufacturing and agriculture, like the infrastructure bank, etc., to do those things that are going to help Australia. The other area I want to comment on, which also gets in the way of our perspective for economic solutions that can benefit everybody, is this absolutely insane, sudden, alarming rush to war. That's what gets, you don't have to have a war to have an economic recovery. We know what to do. Do the things you would do after the war, before the war. But we've got politicians that are so wedded to a certain strategic sense of things, in accordance with what, the late Malcolm Fraser called our dangerous allies, that they will not look at a situation like the rise of China and say, oh, how can the world benefit from cooperating with this clearly successful model? That's successful. We're a basket case. How can we benefit from cooperation? No, we must view it as a threat and take steps that could easily, with a few mistakes, a few unintended consequences, end up in a nightmare scenario. And that's why we have to call that out, right? And that's why the Citizens Party has been rather unique in that regard. We are looking at this campaign as an opportunity to make a big statement on both those fronts. Because if we're not going to do it, I shudder to think how we're going to end up, because no one else seems to be doing it. And that's why we've assembled this force here and our force of supporters to make sure we can intervene in this crucial way. Because if we can do that, there is great solutions. The problems are there to be solved. The postal bank is a wonderful solution for Australia's immediate financial problems. It's there to be done. All we're up against is vested interests. And so we'll expose them and recruit your support as the people who are participating in this and want to decide who to vote for. Help us beat them, please, by supporting our campaign.
Thank you, Robbie. And on this same subject matter, I want to call upon Rod Dole, Senate candidate for Queensland, to make some comments. And on all of the matters covered so far, Russell Francis in South Australia. So first of all, Rod, why are you running as a candidate?
Yeah, I'm running, well, I think our policies are righteous right across the board to uplift our country and bring it back to what used to be some 30 odd years ago. But, and just on what Robbie was saying, what we've seen over the last several years, and in our publication, Australian Alert Service, we've been covering war avoidance, how to avoid World War III, and that's what we're heading to. And what we've seen is this step-by-step of our number one trading partner becoming our number one adversary by what the media portrays it as. And may I say that we are not in a position in any way, shape or form to go to war. We have a citizenry that really need help. And also that, yeah, diplomacy is the better, the better side of war avoidance. It's far cheaper than 171 billion in submarines. We can do far greater than that. Yeah, that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you. And Russell, you have some observations on the National Bank and this question of sovereignty.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, and thanks everyone for tuning in. The reasons I'm involved in this campaign really stem from a conviction that this country of ours is in a state of arrested development, and I feel a real sense of urgency that that's got to change. I mean, I grew up in South Australia. I still live here in Adelaide, have all my life, and I'm 53. And I remember South Australia that was able to generate its own electricity autonomously and provide that cheap baseload power for industry and commerce and citizens. Now that's all gone. We're able to. We had great steel production and manufacturing of glass and chemicals and fertilizers and, of course, automobiles and a whole range of things that we just can't seem to do anymore. But really that whole concept just stems from broken thinking. We can do it, but we need policies and people involved in the legislative process that can give birth to those policies at a federal and then trickling down at the state level. So when it comes to the Citizens Party, it's the only party that I believe has the ethics, the intellectual capacity, and the influence, really. And, you know, a lot of that influence Craig brought up when he introduced what we've achieved in the last few years. The Citizens Party does have influence. And so for me, the urgency of, you know, fixing the country and getting it back on its developmental feet is something that I can feel that I can get involved with because of my awareness of what the Citizens Party stands for. And so, you know, a lot of people watch the television, and I guess you can shout at the TV and that sort of thing. That doesn't really do anything. But knowing that the Citizens Party is there and knowing that they can do these things has really encouraged me to get involved, and that's why I'm running. The idea of sovereignty really, you know, partners well with this idea of developing the country. So if we can establish a national infrastructure bank that will create competition against the commercial banks, then we can issue cheap credit into the physical economy, then we can stop this arrested development trajectory that we've been on for decades and start to rebuild the primary industries of this nation. And then from that, you know, secondary industries can be spun off. And then we can create real wealth for the country that can be shared amongst a wider you know, body of people, and not just have it all concentrated by people who own stocks in Facebook and the FANG stocks, etc. And then once that occurs, then we're going to have that economic capacity to then stand up and become and act more sovereignly, because hand in glove with this reduction in our economic power and in our economic development has been a loss of sovereignty. We've become extremely colonial, I think, in our attitude to who we are and what our place is in the world. We should be able to stand up and have our own voices as be heard by the powers that be, or the powers that shouldn't be. I'm talking about, you know, the people who run the City of London, Wall Street, and you know, our Anglo-American allies, and be able to say no. That's a huge aspect of sovereignty, is the ability to be able to say no to certain things and still march on and develop. And this really leads into, again, what other colleagues of mine have been saying tonight about the mad rush to war. We are in no position as a nation to be moralising and thumping the desk at these so-called adversaries because for some reason they run their countries in an entirely different way. I'll always be an Iraq war rememberer. I will never forget what we've done to a number of nations in our contribution to the wars that have occurred since September 11, 2001. And I'm a firm believer that we have to return to principles of diplomacy with our neighbours, and we have to obtain our security, to quote Paul Keating, who I don't agree with everything he says, but we need to find our security within Asia, not from Asia. So they've touched on a lot of big issues there, but they're the things that I really believe in and I'm passionate about, and feel a real urgency about, and they're the things that I think the Citizens Party is really well placed to do something about, and to break the status quo and the business as usual that's been going on in Canberra for 30 years. So I ask you to support us in our efforts to put good people into the legislative process and break the status quo in this country. Thanks again.
Much appreciated, Russell. Thank you. Very key points there. And we're going to hear from a few more of our candidates, and we're going to shift to talking about infrastructure. But before we do, I just want to put up that website again. Sorry, not the website, the email. If you're watching and you have a question, you don't have to be identified in the question, but if you want to ask this, set of candidates here before us tonight, anything, ask at citizensparty.org.au. The email is being monitored. Anything you send through is being checked, and I'll see it. And I don't think I'm going to get through all these questions tonight. But just before we get to the Q&A, which is coming up very soon, I want to shift to talking about agriculture, infrastructure, the regional areas of Australia and what they require. So what I might do for this is I'll ask Jean to speak in WA, then we'll have Chris Lay and Jeff Davey from Victoria, regional Victoria, Peter Flynn from up there in Northern Territory. If you'll want to say a few words to the subject of why you're running and what your passions are. And then as well, Trudy Campbell from the Northern Territory as well. So Jean, over to you. I've been
part of this political movement for a long time, almost 4 decades actually. And I've really enjoyed this. I was pretty young, three young children, husband, farmer, immigrated from Africa, 5th generation farmer, know a lot of history of farming all around the world, and obviously the greatest impediment to us is what I know instinctively from 5 generations is the British Empire. So basically what we see happening to the world today is the same policy of continualisation of colonialism and in the name of globalisation. And what we've been exposed to is this continuous adoption of British free trade neoliberal policies for 4 decades. This is why Whitlam was sacked. The Liberal and Labor Party's consensus under Gillard is to impose globalisation, and in essence it's just destroyed all the majority of other industries and agriculture and basically turned our nation into a quarry. So, and now of course we're entering the last phase of a financial disintegration of the current global banking system, which was actually forecast by Lyndon LaRouche in 1997. And what's unique about the international organisation and the Citizens Party is we've always put up the solutions for all the problems, always. It's always been there. And, due to free market mandates, and, we actually import and export everything, from whether it's mining or agriculture, and now our trade with our biggest trading partner, China is in decline, and yet we've got a government that wants to go to war, and a media that's banging the drums for that. So so we're witnessing a complete collapse of global and local transport, loss of foreign labour, and it's all been compounded by COVID. So here in WA, the estimation is that we're going to have 80% in areas of local fruit and vegetable plantings and picking. It's not going to get done. We've got the loss of wool, barley and iron ore exports, complete lack of farming imports being imported, privatisation, outsourcing of everything, and the lack of finance for agriculture, industry, manufacturing, the hijacking of all government departments by the green agenda, depopulation, takedown of all the public institutions that, you depend on, public infrastructure, health, education services, energy supplies. Would you believe they're pulling down all the power lines in regional Western Australia and replacing them with diesel engines? That's what we had to do in the 1960s to start diesel engines. So, the health, education, all these services have just been wrecked. The Ag Department's been destroyed, the CSIRO, FISA. So, and also the other problem with business and is the introduction of, like, I call it fascist IT digitalisation of all walks of life, reducing, and it actually reduces productivity, and it stifles creativity because you're no longer in charge of anything. And one of the greatest threats to life and property, of course, is fire, because this is a real problem here in Western Australia. And although it hasn't really been much of a problem until recently, because we've had a whole change of the system. You know, we used to have the best fire voluntary service in every shire council in regional Australia. But what's happened, and it's most threatening, is a takedown of the best protection and methods of preventing fire and personnel. And the green agenda and the over-the-top regulation of the fire department our government has done has meant, you know, it's causing preventable deaths, damage, endangering lives, killing livestock, killing wildlife, environments, the whole work, bottle and dice really. But they're even been filling in all the dams. You're not allowed to fight fires on Crown land. And for people who don't know, 86% of Australia is actually Crown land. And that's why we had 5 people die in Esperance in a huge fire, because they weren't allowed to go and put it out until it was too late. You know, you lost thousands of farm animals and everything else. And there has been very many preventable disasters, but because we have this situation where now the underground firefighters, particularly the volunteers, are not allowed to make fire breaks, they're not allowed to burn back. They don't mandate, FESA doesn't mandate fire breaks around all the dwellings in rural areas anymore. So, you know, which is what we've been doing for several decades. So basically, we have a situation where we're in the end phase of producing food and fodder, especially by the family farmer, which is actually essential to guarantee the food supply for the nation. You know, we used to have 400,000 farmers in Australia, now we only have 40,000. So, and a constant rise of the corporate takeover and ownership of all the farm. It's really decimated the rural areas. Collapse have led to population, towns, rail systems, local industries, healthcare, family life over the last 4 decades. So we need new educational institutions, hands-on sciences, and require a highly developed, productive economy. And we need a whole new workforce for the young youth of our country. And that's why it's absolutely necessary for the Australian Citizens Party platform to be implemented in full, because what we're actually talking about here is actually changing the system. If we don't change the economy and we don't change the banking system, we're never going to get out of this mess. And we're never going to be able to prevent the usual pattern we see in history where, you know, when there's the opportunity to change a policy, you actually end up having war. So all I can say is, you know, the people have to realise that, you know, the family is the foundation of society, and we all have to fight so people can join us and make it happen. That's what needs to be done.
And now moving across to Chris, and just Jean, in case you didn't see it, you got some applause from those on the call, especially Jeff there in Victoria. So in case you didn't see that, to you, Chris, I want to comment on your passions in this election coming up.
Yeah, sure, Glenn. For those who are online there and watching, I entered, I guess the political sphere because, you know, of what was happening to the agricultural sector, what was happening with the privatisation of water supply bodies, the deregulation of food markets, the milk market, and that was the catalyst for me to get involved. I saw in a very short space of time very productive farms like our family business and others just simply capitulate under the weight of lower commodity prices, increased cost of water, and all those sorts of things. I have some heroes in history which I look at, and I look at what John Dunmore Lang did in the late 1800s with cultivating this fervour of what it is to be a sovereign nation. And I'm really I just reiterate what's already been said rather than go too much into it, but I think that's a really integral part of what the Citizens Party is encapsulating in our policies is this sense of sovereignty, this being on our own and being able to run our nation like it ought to be, as John Dunmore Lang often said, and often spent some time in incarceration because of that. But also saw some amazing developments in the early 1900s with the Australian Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which was a nation-building bank, and we need to see the return of that. And the CEC or the Citizens Party has all of the framework for that to happen. I won't separate individual policies because it's so holistic. It all works together. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. It all works together. But there are certain things that really I'm passionate about, and that's agriculture and the survival of family businesses. But we see at the moment we're being absolutely plundered by irresponsible and reckless policy in respect to privatisation, deregulation, the corporatisation of water entitlements, and that complete fraud that the Murray-Darling Basin Commission is trying to put upon most of the basin's residents and farmers. So I would like to see the return of water entitlements back to those people who most can utilise it to do what we do as farmers, to grow food and fibre to feed a nation and indeed the world. So that's one of my great passions in respect to why I'm involved and why I'm representing the Citizens Party on these platforms. Infrastructure, as a young fella, I went and toured the Snowy Hydro scheme. Absolutely blew my mind that we could do this sort of thing back then, and we need to be doing this now. We've got government sitting on their hands every election cycle for decades, and nothing gets done. Nothing gets done. So it would be so great and so amazing for this generation to see a project like those projects that we saw, the late Professor Lance Endersby oversee, the Clarence River Diversion Scheme and projects like that, the Bradford Scheme. This is what needs to happen if we're going to go into the next millennia as a productive nation, as a nation that is a sovereign nation. So it all ties in together. All the platforms, when you look at them, how they work together is we're not making promises here. We've got solutions. And I'm really fed up with going to political forums in the seat of Mallee. It's like a horse race. Oh my gosh, it's like a horse race. There are like 13 candidates and they're all promising something. Well, we're not promising anything. We provide the hope through solution. And that's what I find amazing about the Citizens Party. I'd like to keep going on about it, but we're limited in time, and So
thank you, Chris. No,
but thanks for the opportunity, and thank you for those people who are questioning online, and thank you very much.
Yeah, we're getting a very lively questions coming in. So I'd ask those three, Jeff, Peter, and Trudy Keat. Please keep it brief because we'll hear from you more in the Q&A. But if you want to say a few brief things as to what really is your motivation for running. I know, Jeff, we haven't covered a lot on the big projects in water, but speak to those points and then we'll go to the Q&A.
I'm a third generation dairy farmer here in the Golden Valley. My grandfather was a dairy farmer at Katandra. My father was a dairy farmer at Katunga, where I took over the farm, and I currently have a son who's a dairy farmer in Gippsland. And I can tell you right now that over the last 25 years, I've seen the deterioration of the best irrigation pastures in Victoria turn back to dry land. And it's been done by a deliberate plan, and it was Malcolm Turnbull's 2007 water policy that drove it. And we must repeal that water policy immediately, end speculation on water prices, prohibit water trading from anyone not owning farming land. This was the case on July 1st of July 2014 and opened up South Australia's Lake Alexandria to the ocean, removing the Goolwa barges, around 900 gigalitres. Build the Clarence River system, which would add 1,000 gigalitres per year to the Murray-Darling Basin, generate hydroelectricity and provide flood mitigation for Grafton. Upgrade Lake Burrinjuck and the Murrumbidgee River at its present 1,028 gigalitre capacity to 4,000 gigalitres. We have been deliberately kept down and kept back through international economic order, through the Lehman Declaration, through all these other UN things that we have accepted, or not us, shiny ass bureaucrats who sat and did the vote for us. And we must go back and have a look at all of them and get rid of the whole lot of them. That's my opinion. And that's why I'm standing. We need to development with the infrastructure bank, the post office bank, and get control back of our own destiny, which John Curtin said that governments are not sovereign without national banking. We are not a sovereign nation right now. We're controlled by international finances who tell us what to do, tell our politicians what to do, and the public just go along with it. Now, there's got to be an awakening in this country where the people of the nation wake up to what these bloody politicians are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Peter.
Yeah, right. We'll see how we go. My internet's been dropping in and out since I've been on.
Well, we got you, Peter.
You got me?
Yes.
Lucky thing. Yeah, infrastructure, collapsing financial system, all hooked together. Like we seem to build things down to a price, not up to a standard. Our rail system is one example. Roads are another. You got a lot of, because your rail system's not up to speed, you got a lot of heavy vehicles now using the road for long distance freight. And like, to do it properly, you would put proper infrastructure in, high-speed rail and all that sort of stuff to have that happen. But and the other thing with this collapsing financial market, people have got to realise is where are their superannuation situations? Because if it blows up, we'll get two things. They'll disappear and we'll probably go straight into war, because that's what normally happens when you have a financial collapse. So yeah, that's all I want to say. I'm still on, so there you go.
Thanks, Peter. And over to you, Trudy, to say a few words on your reasons for running.
Well, 40 years in the health system, and to see it be taken down since the 90s when I went down to the office is really quite a stunner. But everything that everybody's raised here today is dependent upon a happy, healthy, unstressed human population, which is what makes up your nation that does the work. So without a fully functioning health system and addressing disease and looking to the longevity of your population to be able to transmit the knowledge to the next generation through whatever participating activities you're in is a vital cornerstone of any sovereign nation. And I think China are well and truly aware of that. So we have to go back to basically having a fully serviced health system, united again, instead of having it all carved up into little bits and specialities, and put the general welfare of the people in the first place, and get rid of this idea of lives unworthy of life, because that's the underlying axiom. You know, I'm in my 70s now. I'm past my use-by date. But anyway, that's enough.
Oh, thank you, Trudy. So we went extensively around to hear from all candidates then, and that has pushed us beyond the 1.5 hour mark. But so I must emphasise for all our candidates, brief answers. So short, sharp delivery on the answers to these questions today. Craig, I'm going to throw a few questions open to you, which are just general ones about the election. First question of the night is, will you have candidates running in all electorates in Australia? And secondly, and this can be answered by others if you want to, just use the raise hand thing on the Teams and we'll know. Who are you going to give your preferences to? And if I may also group that question with one more. This comes from John in Brisbane. And again, for Craig to answer and others, he says, I agree with every point of the 15-point program. Is our best strategy to give our preferences to a major party who will then give us a voice in the next parliament? Then we can get our party objectives on the agenda. If this is correct, what is the best action plan to achieve this influence? So, over to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Glenn. We are going to run as many candidates as we can in the elections that people put their hand up for. There's no restriction on that. We can't run candidates in every electorate at the moment because we don't have people putting up their hands. And so that's the first one. On the preferences, well, after watching what Scott Morrison did to Christine Holgate, I don't think this guy deserves a vote, let alone preferences. Now that puts us in a dilemma because in the situation, in a two-party preferred system, a two-party system like we've got, it's all like a duopoly. In politics, you have to make a decision of the lesser of two evils, and we've been doing that for nearly 30 years. Who are you going to give your preference to make the least, or have the most potential for change in the future, which goes to the third question there of, you know, recruiting the major parties. That doesn't work. Their agenda is not our agenda. Their agenda is, as we said, neoliberalism. Unless they're prepared to change that agenda, we don't have much in common, and all we can do is work with those members of parliament that are actually in agreement in principle with what we say. And there are members of parliament that are in there that we can work with. So in terms of preferences, it's on, for the lower house candidates, it's a discussion process of looking at who the candidates are, what they stand for, and then making decisions accordingly. That's a house by house decision, a House of Representatives by House of Representatives decision on our part. As far as the Senate is concerned, again, we look at the parties, but at the end of the day, it does boil down to you're going to give your preferences to Liberal or to Labor, or there might be some very high profile other independents, or maybe they give us their preferences and we get elected and don't have to worry about it. Thanks.
Would anyone else like to speak to that set of three questions on preference, candidacy, or the major parties? Otherwise, I can move on to the next one. There's lots of questions to get to. Yeah, Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just quickly like to say that votes don't change the direction of the country. Actions do. Policies do. So until the major parties actually show through their actions that they're going to do something that's really concrete, I don't think they deserve our preferences.
All right, this next set of questions. Okay, there's a few here. I might take these in two parts. These next two questions relate to our policy of banking and the financial system. And I'm definitely happy to hear what, Bob, your thoughts are on this, as well as Robbie. Looking at the parties fighting platform, there are several policies relating to banking and the financial system. What will the impact be on the current system if these policies are introduced? Wouldn't these policies crash the system? How will that help Australians? That's the first question from Tom in the Hunter Valley. The second question is from Terry, who says, when the US dollar hyperinflates, dies and crashes all fiat currencies, what currency do you expect your Australia Post National Bank to use, and what plan does the ACP have to replace the dying Australian dollar fiat currency? So Bob, Robbie, and then others if you want to chime in.
Well, I'll start. Will our policies crash the system? No, our policies will change the system. The system is going to crash. We're in an inevitable collapse phase of the system. The collapse has already started. It began with it erupted with a vengeance in 2008. What you've had is an extraordinary bout of unprecedented money printing since then, and now the consequences of that are beginning to emerge. And some viewers might be familiar with the fact that in September 2019, before the pandemic, there was a massive emergency injection of funds in Wall Street by the Federal Reserve through the repo market on an absolutely emergency basis. This has been a system on life support since 2008. They did nothing to change the system except in one part of the world. While the Western central banks were pumping out printed money through quantitative easing, the Chinese issued an enormous sum of credit and put it into absolutely productive enterprises. And that's what kept the world economy going. Since 2008, China has built 36,000 kilometers of high-speed rail using our iron ore, and they've become a productive powerhouse. So thank goodness, in terms of global economic terms, thank goodness that happened, because the rest of us became basket cases, to the extent that Joe Biden goes to that town goes to Pittsburgh to announce funding for a bridge, and a bridge collapses while he's there. Right? This is a metaphor for the state of our real economy. So the system is collapsing. Ours will change the system. In answer to Terry's question about the fiat currency, the issue with the fiat currency is what is it being used for? And again, the question becomes one of is the nature of its use productive, or is it purely speculative? I think there's too much emphasis on the fiat nature of the currency, where people are focusing on that word rather than what is it being used for. And it's not, since we've identified since the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1972, the system has become increasingly speculative. Since 83 in Australia, that's been absolutely the case. You've had before this last couple of years with the pandemic, I don't want to use the word hiccup to downplay it, but it's been an aberration in terms of the way our economic experience has been. Before that, our banks, our private banks, which were the only credit emitters in the country, were pumping out something like between 500 billion and $1 trillion a year in created credit. For what? For mortgages. What we're saying with our policies is take away the monopoly of creating credit from the private banks that they're just putting into speculating in housing, that's making housing unaffordable for us. And if you take away that monopoly so that some of the credit emitting power is back in the hands of the government, and all of its credit emitted goes into productive enterprises, you both make your economy functional again, and you give your currency value, because it's backed up by the real things that it's going to create. So no, our policies are not the end of the system, but it's a fundamental change of the system.
All right.
Yep, I would agree with all of that. But the system itself, the banking system, needs to change. Government needs to become involved again through a national bank to create credit for the building of infrastructure, to insert credit into the system for productive purposes. At the moment, what we've got is a private banking system that in effect is a casino economy. It's involved in speculation. Money does not go into productive purposes. And that is the purpose of principally the first three of our policies. Initially, the postal bank, which will be government owned, will start to defeat the monopoly that the private banks have got at the moment. It will provide access to cash, access to banking facilities through the postal system using the infrastructure of the post as the Commonwealth Bank, when it originally started, used. We then need
an infrastructure bank and a national bank to then provide credit and get away from the current system where credit is controlled by the private banks. And to control them, we need Glass-Steagall to separate the speculative aspects of those banks from the productive elements. The speculative element are on their own, would probably crash. The productive side would be protected by government, guaranteed by government, and ultimately you get back to a sane banking system.
Thanks, Bob. I'm going to jump across a few subjects now to a question. There's a multitude of questions coming in on foreign policy, more on national banking and inflation concerns. There's a lot on question of education and culture, but this question relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. Actually, there's two. I'll read both out and I'll be welcoming responses from all. And I might call upon Craig, you to speak first to this, but all are welcome to comment. This first question comes from Elaine in Preston. She says, I think the ACP has sound policies and I agree with most of them, but the ACP has not discussed or criticised the COVID policies and mandates. What is the ACP's position? Another question comes from Marie in Brisbane. She says, I am immune compromised. I have an autoimmune disease and I'm on autoimmune suppressants. Yet I don't support vaccine mandates. But I feel abandoned from any real discussion and consideration of people like me in these circumstances, including our elderly. How would the Citizens Party deal with COVID if you were in power? Craig.
It's a big and divisive topic, this one, because everyone's got opinions on it. At the end of the day, as I've said to people in discussions that we've had from the office here to our supporters and so forth, it really does boil down to discussions between yourself and the people that you trust in the medical profession. If you go looking on internet, you'll find nothing but very confusing, quite often non-scientific based stuff that's creating a great deal of fear in the population. So in terms of vaccine mandates, we don't support the idea of vaccine mandates as a shortcut for the collapsing public healthcare system. You've had 40 years of a collapse in the public health system where the entire system is scrambling to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's a real problem. If we're in power, from my view, again, and the Citizens Party is not united, there's many different voices on this because of, it does boil down to what I believe is a personal position. Because you're talking about you personally taking an immunisation, it's a personal issue. When it comes down to that issue, like I said, it does come down to the discussions between your own trusted private doctors and yourself. As far as the, if we were in power, I think we'd be listening to the best possible science. Right, there's lots of opinions made about this decision that's being made and that decision is made. We're not in power. We don't have access to a lot of the reasons for decisions that are made. We get partial access to this and to that, but we would be searching for the best possible way out of this to minimise the stress within the population and to maximise the sanctity of life. When you're in public office, you've got very, very grave decisions to make to protect the whole population, and you can't come from that simply because of your own personal prejudices. And this is why there's a lot of discontent. There's a lot of stuff flying around on the internet. I don't look at the stuff on the internet because I don't have the time. Our organisation doesn't have the time to research out every little piece of information and come up with a position on it. If we did that, if we did that, the people of our country would not have the benefit of what we've been able to achieve on our core policies. And, the victims of Sterling First would have got wiped out from as far as our efforts are concerned because we've become embroiled in something that, in a sense, has no bottom. So, like I say, it's a very contentious subject, and maybe Robbie and others have a view on it. But that's my particular view on it, and I discuss it with anyone who wants to talk to me about it personally. But we don't come up with a unified policy on this because it's such a broad policy that we do not have the expertise in to be able to comment on. I'm not a medical professional, and I don't intend to start making comments on issues that are of a very medical nature.
What I would say, Craig, is we're acutely aware of the uncertainties, but there are some things we are very certain about, and it's reflected in the longer form of our fighting platform, which is that, as Trudy said, the state of our healthcare was parlous even before the pandemic hit. We've had a period of 3 decades of supposedly world record economic growth, during which we reduced the availability of healthcare. We didn't increase it. Especially in regional Australia, you're 4 times more likely to die an unavoidable death simply due to the lack of availability of healthcare, because so much of that infrastructure was dismantled, concentrated in centres further away, etc. This is this is not how the country that had the world record economic growth should have dealt with it. As an aside, what it proves is our record economic growth wasn't that real to begin with. It was all debt-based, etc. But health has to go back to being a priority. Dan Andrews did say at the beginning of the pandemic that he would expand the number of ICU beds in Victoria to 4,000, and he didn't do anything of the sort. And all other governments are the same. They should have taken this pandemic as the wake-up call to mobilise the biggest injection of resources into healthcare, since World War II on relative terms, and instead they didn't. And where we criticise the mandates and the restrictions is where they have become a substitute for that kind of investment, right? And that's where we're very, very clear on that. They should never have been a substitute for that kind of investment. It doesn't say there's not circumstances where they're appropriate, but they should never be a substitute for that kind of investment. We should have a much more powerful healthcare system now. We should have much greater training programs to bring in the clinical staff we need, and we've done hardly any of what was required. And that's what the Citizens Party would change.
And I want to move to Trudy, who has comments to make on this as well. Go ahead, Trudy.
Yeah, well, that was the whole key thing. Everybody's been brainwashed to believe it's a silver bullet. But I mean, what good is a silver bullet without a gun to fire it? So if you don't have a solid foundation in the structure, the staffing, the ongoing increasing of your capacity to support the healthier people, then it's not going to work. So I mean, we make scientific breakthroughs. I remember when I was in the 80s, I was working in a nursing home out there in Redlands, and they put out a call because they had a big breakout of MRSA. So they didn't want the internal staff at the PA to actually, be in the hospital. So we were taken from our position and went in there to do the nursing, so it wasn't conveyed. And then that led to, going into another period where they were wanting ICU nurses. So, you go and you train and you know how to do those things. Well, that opportunity is really not there at the moment because everything's so isolated. They're training them in the universities, but they're not marrying what they're learning with practice, with actually experimenting and finding out, well, does it really work? How do you do it? How does this work? How does that work? And they don't get enough time in the real physical world to marry in their own minds the knowledge that they have, theoretical knowledge that they have, to give them the insight to actually recognise when a patient's condition is changing or altering in any way or whatever. So you can't put you can't put brains into monuments in some sense, but we need to have an increasing structure of our health system, return the rural sector so you've got a general GP on hand and anaesthetists. Each rural community used to have a theatre, a maternity section, right? Well, that's all gone. So it can come back, but that's what we have to do.
Thank you. This next set of questions relates to education and culture, and I would like to hear from Alexis and those and Paul in regards to these next questions, and anyone else for that matter who would like to answer. For this question comes from Steve in Melbourne. Will the ACP re-establish technical colleges so our youth can be put through trades by retired tradesmen? This will be necessary as an important process to include Australian youth in the future projects and infrastructure projects. Cease our need to bring in cheap labour. Another question. This is from Johanna in Melbourne. He says, I've witnessed disturbing cultural decay amongst the Western nations over these last decades, coinciding with significant changes in education system. How does the Citizens Party see the connection between economy, education and culture? How will you address the current collapse in vital nation-building areas? And yeah, so you guys want to comment on those?
I'll go ahead, thank you. Just, I guess, talking about the issue of manufacturing, really, because that's one of the end products of putting more time, effort, investment into the TAFE system. I know watching my mother, who was involved in technical colleges in the good old days where you used to be able to go and have the trades attached to the high schools, was a really useful model and very effective. Being involved in the construction industry and the TAFE system myself now, what I can see is that it's exciting that they're having more women come into the trades, and yet there's got to be a less bureaucratic and more effective way of training people quickly and imparting those skills. There's a lot of sitting at computers, which is unfortunately when you work in the trades, a lot of wasted time for the students when they have very limited time to expose themselves to the wealth of knowledge and the wisdom that can come from experienced tradespeople. So I would be encouraging that we look at shaking that up a little bit. And people are very intelligent, they learn quickly. So it doesn't need to be as dragged out for many of the aspects of training in the TAFE system that it currently is. I think that the ways that we've been teaching are a little bit outdated, and we need to understand that people's minds can absorb information, adapt to it, apply it much more quickly, especially the next generation. I know with my youngest, who's 6, she says the word hashtag at the end of everything. She's already designed her own YouTube channel. She's 6. So I think that the people who are managing these systems really need to fast track themselves or replace themselves with people who are more willing to be fast moving in an economic situation that needs fast moving thinking and a fast peeling away of all the restrictions that stop people learning fast and getting themselves into proper jobs at a grassroots level. And that includes the innovation in manufacturing that can come as a result of those TAFE and university courses much more quickly than they currently are. People are smart. We should unleash education in a much more dynamic way, just to allow people to use their natural infinite potential to get stuff done.
All right.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I just want to go off the end of what Alexis said, and but being a trainer myself, I find that to go back to that model of having the secondary schools go back to being technical colleges, that might be almost impossible to do. But what can be done is to actually modernise and expedite the rolling out of technical training, like what Alexis says, and trying to streamline the TAFE training. The loss of our major manufacturing has put an enormous gap in our skills pool, or it's created this skill shortage. We used to have tens, if not tens of thousands of young people, either directly or indirectly, trained and employed in our manufacturing and car industries, and we just don't have that anymore. And now, fully aware that the construction industry is actually moving at a rapid pace, and I was just recently having a discussion with some those who employ trained individuals and apprentices, and they just simply cannot find them. They're not there because they haven't been trained. They're not identifying young people in the secondary system and putting them through their trade-based apprenticeships and all that sort of thing. So it needs to be modernised and streamlined to make and ensure that this current generation are identified, trained with their skills, particularly technical skills, they're not all academics. They all can't go and get degrees. We need those young people trained in technical skills. And I have to reiterate what Alexis said. Absolutely, that's what has to happen. And I know that the Citizens Party will be focusing on this type of education for our tertiary students. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I'll just add one thing to both Alexis and Chris's comments there is I'm in the construction or commercial air conditioning, and we need to have more industry involved in TAFE. The prime example I'll just give quickly is in Victoria, in Melbourne specifically, the AMCA, which is the Australian Mechanical Contract Association, they got together with the TAFE of Victoria and started their own course specifically for their industry. This is for draftsmen particularly. So each company would put a person to teach a different class at the TAFE or in the AMCA's head office. They'd go for that. TAFE would support it. TAFE would do some there. Every apprentice or every trainee has to be approved and signed off by each representative for every major air conditioning company. So small ones might have one trainee thing. It's a very good system. It probably should be looked at in more industries, to have industries involved in the TAFE so they get a better result from it. So that's all I basically have to say. Thank you.
To this question, so Anne and then Russell.
I was just going to say Russell was before me, but I was basically going to say that like everything that we're talking about here is true, right? We need to have that training. But what are we training for? You know, do you work from the bottom up or do we work from the top down? And that's where if you look at our policy platform and, you know, something that's not, I suppose, defined specifically as a science driver program, that is what this is all about. You've got national banking, then you have credit that goes into building major infrastructure development that's going to be beneficial for the country. Now, that inspires people. You've got to have engineers. You've got to have all of the skills to be able to bring that about. And the thing that makes us uniquely human is when we are able to participate creatively in changing the future, in bringing about the future that we want to have, which is what infrastructure enables us to do. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Thanks, Anne. And Russell.
Absolutely. Well done. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to tie in with some of the things that Anne said, and it ties back to this idea of building physical economy again, or rebuilding a physical economy again. I mean, and I've experienced education in many forms. I did some training in a hospital back in the 80s, and I also did a degree in a university, and I've experienced the TAFE advanced diploma level course as well. So I've been exposed to lots of different ways of being educated, but that doesn't make me an expert. But just to build on Anne's point is that what are we training for? You know, in China, they're graduating, I think, about 300,000 STEM graduates a year, which is about 3 times what America's churning out now. And there's a motivating force there, I'm guessing, for these graduates, and that is that when they come out, they're going to be working on these fantastic STEM-related projects, and some of them are absolutely breathtaking. So if we're going to rebuild this physical economy, we're going to, have to build advanced, high tech solutions to some of our 21st century problems. And if you're if you're thinking about studying mechanical engineering at uni, the first year, the attrition rate is just like a bloodbath. So you've got to have something. You've got to have somewhere to, to direct all of the advanced knowledge that you're going to be losing sleep over, getting stressed out over for 4 or 5 years of your degree. So I think the two are intimately entwined. That's all I wanted to say.
We're going to move to subject of war and foreign policy. This next question comes from John Lander, the retired ambassador, I believe, to Iran and at one point in China. And John asked this question: the current government's hostility towards China is extremely detrimental to the trading relationship with one of our most important economic partners. It also risks embroiling us in devastating and unwinnable war. Could the candidates please elaborate on how they would handle this question in Parliament? Maybe Robbie, you want to start with that one, and we'll hear from anyone who wants to comment. Rod, Craig. Yep.
Well, it would be a breath of fresh air to have a discussion on this question in Parliament. I can name perhaps 2 politicians in the current Parliament who have even attempted to question the current suddenly vicious anti-China narrative. So if the Citizens Party was in there, the first way we would handle it is start the discussion. And essentially there's two points that we would debate and argue. One is that what we're being told is our position on China at the moment is one of standing up for our sovereignty, which is a lie, an out and out lie. We have outsourced our sovereignty to our large allies, the United States and the United Kingdom, who, as I quoted before, Malcolm Fraser called them our dangerous allies. This is as clear as day. This is, if this was aired in Parliament, this would be undeniable, how much we are the victims of foreign interference here to push us in this position. And every latest deal proves that. One of the examples is June 26, 2019, the current Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, greeted the Belt and Road Initiative for the positive impact it can have in the region. And within a year, he was blowing it up. He was attacking Dan Andrews for having signed a Belt and Road Agreement, all under the orders of Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State. So we have no sovereignty on this question. And the second debate is one of national interest. Our national interest dictates that we need to develop our economy. We need to turn around this collapsing economic system that we're in, that due to everything we talk about, the 40 years of neoliberalism, that we've lost our manufacturing and our skills and all these sort of things. That's what we should be concentrating on. And if we were concentrating on that, we would be wanting to cooperate with the successful economies. That's why the Belt and Road is such an incredible opportunity for Australia to participate in. That is our national interest, yet we are being told that our national interest is one that actually risks a war of annihilation through a demonization of China that we've debunked repeatedly is based on lies. And I just have to point out, 3 days ago in the Australian Parliament, there was a report handed down by the Senate Inquiry into Manufacturing, which is a very lame report, but it's majority Labor and their recommendations are quite lame. There's a dissenting report from the Liberal, from the senators representing the sitting Liberal government, and they attack any effort to have any form of government investment in manufacturing on purely neoliberal doctrinal terms, free market terms. No, the government shouldn't be involved in this. These are the same people who at the beginning of the 2019-2020 pandemic acknowledged Australia needs more manufacturing. Well, less than 2 years later, they're saying, oh yeah, but we're not going to do anything about it. And yet they're the ones that are talking about us in some fantasy fighting a war. this is the caliber of the people we'll be having this argument with. So first we have to begin a debate and we have to argue those 2 points. And I think the exporters of Australia who've lost their livelihoods will quickly get behind that kind of leadership. Last week, the Meat Industry Council, for the first time, actually did speak up and put the blame where it belongs on the Australian government instead of on China for once.
Absolutely, yeah.
Jeff, you want to say some things on this one? Take it away. Yep, go ahead.
I want to just read a little bit from this. This is an assessment for the proposals of the new International Economic Order, come out in 1979. This implications for Australian policy. In this sense, the NEO proposals, as presented in the UN, have serious adverse implications for Australia's security and economic welfare. Moreover, an international economic system that involves the exercise of sustained economic or other powers by international institutions could impinge on Australia's sovereignty in ways that could have serious implications for the nature of Australian society. Now, that was written in 1979. Andrew Peacock, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, when he accepted the Lima Declaration, he gave a speech about it. He said, the transfer of technology to developing countries is another basic concern. We are participating actively in the work in the United Nations system aimed at drawing up a code of conduct for the transfer of technology. I'm convinced that the developing countries would make rapid strides of technology appropriate to their needs was made much more freely available to them. It's clear that research and development capacity of the developed countries could readily and relatively cheaply direct to that objective. In the field of industrialisation, Australia has broadly accepted the Lima Declaration Plan of Action. Now, since 1975, we have lost over 65% of our manufacturing base and something like 200,000 family farmers. This is why we don't have kids learning TAFE anymore, where they've shut down the TAFE system. Everything is designed for a slow economic shutdown, and it's been done through the UN. People of Australia have to wake up and start to realise this. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Craig. And then I see Jan would like to say something as well. So,
well, John
yeah,
asked.
Well, hang on. Thanks, John, for the question. I want to take a page out of General Smedley Butler's book, who wrote on war is a racket. And he joined the Marines in the US when he was 16 years old. I can't remember how many wars he fought, but he didn't really get it. And he didn't really get that it was a racket until I think he was 39 or 40 and he woke up. And he wrote this brief pamphlet where he makes these recommendations to end all wars, because he said you've got to take the profiteering out of war. So one of his suggestions, although they might seem simplistic, he was as serious as hell. And that is the people that are on the front line who risk their lives and often come back maimed physically or mentally, how much money are they earning when they're fighting for their or supposedly fighting for their nation? And he recommends that everybody in the whole country, the president, the big companies that make that profiteer from war, every CEO in the country, they all should get equal the same pay as the guy on the front line. The other thing he said was that your planes, your aircraft, they shouldn't leave more than 500 miles from your country. Your ships shouldn't leave more than 200 miles from your country, and your defence force should be a defence force and stay in your country. And he was highly decorated. the enemy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the money power, they chose General Smedley Butler to lead a fascist coup to take over the presidency and represent, the big end of town, because FDR was out to, implement. He didn't have a national bank, but he ensured that he did get the New Deal by implementing the Glass-Steagall banking separation, and launched the revolution in dam building and power generation. So, I think because Smedley Butler's, I could relate to him because I have the same kind of conviction. So I wanted to put, maybe John can look him up.
Okay. Thanks, John, for your question. You asked what the candidates would do in Parliament. Well, I'll tell you, there's three things I would do. The first thing is that I would congratulate President Xi Jinping and President Putin for protecting and standing up for their citizens and for their sovereignty. The Citizens Party, the Citizens Electoral Council, has for a long time promoted the concept of what we call the Treaty of Westphalia, or the principle of the advantage of the other. This is synonymous with President Xi Jinping's win-win solution. We also promote the idea of peace through economic development. So these are the points I would make in my maiden speech. The second point is I would, because we're talking about war, I'd declare war on those institutions that are propagating these absolute lies for the benefit of geopolitical masters from Parliament under parliamentary privilege, and make sure everyone knows who's doing what and why. And the third thing is, I would stand next to the Chinese community, in particular here. The Chinese community is becoming terrorised because of the attacks on China, and that is un-Australian. I'm sorry, it's just un-Australian. It's not who we are. We don't, and unfortunately, many people who don't understand the bigger issues and how they're being manipulated are terrorising our Chinese population, and that is absolutely terrible. So from the Parliament, I'd make sure they had a voice, they had an avenue to correct any injustices. That's what I would concretely do, and under those headings, I would hope to be able to create absolute turmoil within the Parliament so that the people can see what is actually being talked about and what takes place.
I want to thank Robbie, Jeff, Jan and Craig for all those comments. I think those are all absolutely critical. Being our first event like this, we have a huge density of questions to run through, and we will not do justice to it tonight, and we have allocated a little bit more extra time to cover some of those questions. Rest assured to the audience out there that's sticking with us almost into the 2.5 hour mark, we will be back to have more events of this nature. Your questions will be answered. And if you still have questions after tonight and everything that's been presented, do ask them. I want to also emphasise, before we go to our last round of questions, on the question of what next, what do I do, what can I do, I'll get to that in a second. I do want to mention that we are going into full campaign mode, and campaigns require funds. And the funding goes to our internet outreach, it goes to our video production, it goes to the flyers and leaflets, and we don't want to be like Korg, who didn't get out enough flyers and no one came to his revolution. We have to make sure that we have the infrastructure for our candidates to get out there en masse with the material. On your screen, you'll see that there is a donate page, citizensparty.org.au/donate. It's in the description. And it's in the description below this video as well. So I'll just make that plug now, but our final questions for the evening, and we will have more in future weeks. This is on activation. Might actually group a few of these questions, and I'm going to open it up to everyone to answer this one. So the first question comes from Ryan. My question is how we could help in the campaign in the election, either running for an empty seat or helping others within their campaign. We have Swee, who has asked, how can one best support this campaign as a voter where no ACP candidates are fielded? Is there a list of candidates from other parties which champion ACP favoured causes in the absence of the ACP candidate? And another gentleman has asked the question, do you have any political material or how to votes that I can give out and promote? So the question from all of these people is, how can I get more involved in the Citizens Party election campaign?
I'll just quickly address the one from Swee, because we'll endeavour to run good campaigns where we can, and we're going to cover most of the Senate. So wherever you are in Australia, you should be able to at least vote for us in the Senate. We won't be able to cover every House of Representatives seat. So where we don't have a candidate for you to vote for, we do have policies that we invite all the other parties to join us in supporting, especially our signature policy of the postal bank. The postal bank, the reason it's at the top of the list, the postal bank is the one policy we have that actually has broad bipartisan support across all the parties in Parliament. They all support, there's people in all those parties that support it. We want to make it so popular that they try and outdo each other in stealing an office, because we just need this bank set up. And what you can do concretely is go to all those candidates and say, do you support a postal bank? We'll talk to your people and get them involved and pick it up, take it off the Citizens Party, make it your policy. We have lots of things people can do to help spread the word. Contact local councils, talk to local communities affected by bank closures, all those sort of things. Talk to your local post offices, the licensed post office movement. Support the postal bank policy. It's going to save their businesses and save the Australia Post Network. So if people can get involved in that level, you can absolutely campaign for the postal bank, even if there's not a Citizens Party candidate in your seat.
Well, all right then, and do check in with the Citizens Party website on the election 2022. That page will have a lot of instructions, and you'll be able to see what the candidates are calling for. They'll be posting videos and other things as we get into it. Now, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but the election must be called before, I believe, the 23rd of May. The 21st of May. So that gives us a sort of an outlier, but it could come as soon as March. So we've got a lot to do. I want to thank everyone who has tuned in online across Australia. Share this video on YouTube when it's posted shortly. I want to thank all the candidates for joining us tonight. We're keen to welcome you back for more comment and questions and answers in future. This has been a great introduction and campaign launch. So thank you. I wish everyone a good evening, and we'll leave it there for now, but we'll see you all again soon.
Authorised by Craig Isherwood, Citizens Party, Melbourne.